There's a moment in life where nothing dramatic happens, no breakdown, no explosion, no big goodbye. And yet you quietly realize something irreversible has already shifted. You don't want to go back. Not to the role you played. Not to the version of you who survived instead of lived. If you're an Aquarius or simply moving through an Aquarian season, this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about walking through a gateway where the old identity can't follow. You may feel calm and unsettled, hopeful and strangely detached. If that sounds like you, type "I feel it" in the comments. Because what you're stepping into next isn't a change. It's a different way of existing. You know what's strange? Aquarius freedom doesn't announce itself loudly when it arrives. It doesn't crash through your life like a storm. It slips in quietly, almost shy, often at a moment when you're no longer chasing anything. Have you noticed how, at this stage of life, being right feels less important than being at peace? Being admired feels hollow compared to being honest. Even success, the kind you once worked so hard to prove, doesn't hold the same weight anymore. This isn't you giving up. This is you outgrowing. Because freedom isn't doing whatever you want. That's a younger idea of freedom. A louder one. Freedom now is subtler. It's the relief of no longer forcing yourself into roles you didn't consciously choose. Roles you inherited. Roles you adapted to survive. Roles that once kept you safe, but slowly started to feel like a tight room with no windows. And the truth is, most people over 35 don't fall apart when they wake up. They don't burn their lives down. They don't make dramatic exits. They simply stop showing up where their soul feels miscast. They answer fewer calls. They explain themselves less. They let certain conversations expire. They begin to value silence not as emptiness, but as spaciousness. And if you're an Aquarius, this realization hits differently. Because you've always sensed that life wasn't meant to be a performance. That you weren't built to live on borrowed scripts. Still, you tried. You adapted. You learned how to function inside systems that never truly reflected who you were. Until one day, something subtle shifted. Not anger. Not despair. Just clarity. A quiet knowing that says, I can't keep living in reaction to my past. I can't keep shaping myself around expectations that no longer resonate. And here's the part no one talks about enough. When freedom starts to matter more than everything else, it can feel unsettling. Because freedom asks you to stand without constant validation, without the familiar tension of striving, without the identity of struggle. And that can feel unfamiliar, even lonely, especially if you've spent most of your life being needed, proving your worth, or holding everything together. So let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you made a choice that no one applauded, but your body immediately relaxed? That moment matters more than you think. Because that's awareness. That's awakening. That's you realizing you're not weak for wanting ease. You're not selfish for choosing alignment. You're not lost for stepping away. You're awake. And awakening doesn't rush you. It doesn't push. It invites. It invites you to live slower, to listen more deeply, to trust that the life unfolding now doesn't need to look impressive to be meaningful. If this resonates, if something in you feels seen rather than stirred, stay with me. Because this quiet shift you're experiencing is only the threshold. And what opens next isn't about changing who you are, it's about finally living as yourself. Sometimes, Aquarius, the hardest battles are the ones no one ever knows you are fighting. From the outside, you look composed, steady, functional. You still show up, you still respond. You still carry yourself with that familiar calm people have always mistaken for strength. But inside, something is constantly moving. Not chaos, not collapse. More like a quiet pressure that never fully releases. Your mind runs faster than it used to. Thoughts overlap. Memories resurface without warning. Questions echo at odd hours when the world is asleep and you are wide awake, staring into the dark. And yet you don't call it panic. You don't name it overwhelm. You've lived long enough to know those words feel too dramatic for what you're experiencing. So you carry it silently. Because you've learned that explaining yourself often takes more energy than simply enduring. There's a particular kind of fatigue that comes from holding it all together so well that no one thinks to ask if you're okay. And maybe that's why this phase feels so strange. You're not falling apart, you're not breaking down, but you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. The truth is, the most exhausted people are often the calmest in the room. They've mastered control. They know how to regulate. They've learned how to stay composed even when something inside them is shaking. And if you're an Aquarius, you've always been especially good at this. You learned early how to think your way through emotion, how to stay rational when things felt overwhelming, how to keep your inner world private because it was easier than being misunderstood. But here's what no one tells you. Silent overwhelm isn't a failure of resilience. It's often a sign of growth outpacing expression. You are processing more than you can articulate, feeling more than you want to burden others with, holding awareness that hasn't found language yet. So instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of unloading, you contain. And that containment can feel lonely, especially when people assume that because you seem okay, you must be okay. Let me ask you something softly. When was the last time someone checked on you without needing anything in return? That question lands differently at this stage of life. Because you've been the listener, the stabilizer, the one who holds space while others unravel. And now, as you move through this quieter awakening, you're realizing that strength doesn't always mean carrying more. Sometimes it means allowing yourself to admit that something feels heavy even if you can't fully explain why. This inner tension you're feeling is not a warning sign. It's not something going wrong. It's your nervous system recalibrating to a version of life that doesn't require constant vigilance. And recalibration can feel uncomfortable before it feels peaceful. So if you've been wondering why you feel fine and not fine at the same time, why your body feels tired even when your life looks stable, why your thoughts won't slow down even though your world isn't on fire, stay with me. Because this quiet internal battle isn't meant to break you. It's preparing you for a way of living that no longer demands you stay strong at your own expense. And what begins to surface next may surprise you. There comes a point, Aquarius, when you stop waiting for a sign and realize the sign already happened. Not in the sky, not through a message, but inside your body. It shows up as a quiet refusal, a soft no that doesn't need explanation, a sense that something is complete even though nothing officially ended. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think endings must be loud to be real. They expect tears, confrontations, dramatic exits. But some chapters close the way dusk arrives, slowly, almost unnoticed, until suddenly the light is different. You don't announce it, you don't make a speech, you simply stop returning. Not because you're angry, not because you were wronged, but because something in you no longer recognizes the place you're standing in. This is what stepping through a gateway actually feels like. No fireworks, no collapse, just a calm awareness that you are done negotiating with a past version of yourself. You may still walk by familiar streets, still hear familiar names, still remember how things used to feel, but there's no pull anymore, and that can feel unsettling. Because without drama, you wonder if it was real. Without chaos, you question whether you're allowed to leave. Without a clear ending, you hesitate. So let me tell you this, gently. Closure is not something you receive, it's something you embody. You don't owe anyone a performance of your departure. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't have to explain why you no longer fit into places that were built around an earlier version of you. For someone like you, Aquarius, this kind of ending is especially significant, because you've always known when something had run its course. You sensed it long before others noticed. You felt the energy change, the conversations thinning, the meaning fading. And instead of forcing an ending, you waited until your nervous system relaxed around the idea of leaving. That's when you knew. There is a quiet dignity in walking away without resentment, in choosing not to revisit what has already taught you everything it could, in allowing a door to close without slamming it. This doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. You're not abandoning anyone, you're honoring the truth that growth doesn't always come with witnesses. And maybe the most profound endings are the ones that don't ask for validation. The ones that happen in a single breath when you realize you've already crossed over. So let me ask you something softly. Is there a place in your life you keep revisiting not because it still belongs to you, but because leaving quietly feels unfamiliar? If so, stay with that question. You don't need to answer it tonight. Just notice how your body responds when you imagine not going back. Because this phase you're in is not about loss. It's about release. And what opens when you stop returning is a kind of light that doesn't chase you. It waits. There is a moment, Aquarius, right after you stop going back, when everything inside you seems to arrive all at once. Not loudly, not violently, but all together. You can feel calm and restless in the same breath, grounded in your body, yet strangely untethered from direction. Hope flickers softly somewhere in your chest, while fear lingers just beneath it, not screaming, just watching. And that can be confusing, because you were taught that emotions should line up neatly. That clarity means choosing one feeling and staying there. That peace should feel clean, quiet, resolved. But what you're experiencing now doesn't follow those rules. You might wake up feeling steady, almost serene, only to be hit by a wave of uncertainty while making coffee. You might feel deeply present in one moment, then suddenly unsure of where you're headed the next. And the mind, being what it is, wants to intervene. It wants to label, to organize, to decide what's wrong and what needs fixing. But listen to me, Aquarius. Nothing here is broken. What you're feeling is not chaos. It's overlap. This is what happens when an old identity dissolves before a new one fully forms. Psychology has a name for this. An identity transition. That in-between space where the nervous system hasn't caught up to the truth the soul already knows. You are no longer who you were, but you haven't rehearsed who you're becoming. So emotions coexist. They don't cancel each other out. They sit side by side, like colors blending at the edge of a horizon. Calm doesn't erase anxiety. Hope doesn't eliminate fear. Being grounded doesn't mean you won't feel lost. It means you're honest. And honesty, at this level, feels complex. Especially for you. Because you've always been someone who thinks deeply. Who tries to understand before reacting. Who believes that if you can just name a feeling, you can manage it. But this phase isn't asking you to manage anything. It's asking you to witness. To let sensations move through without interrogation. To allow contradictions to exist without explanation. To trust that your system knows how to reorganize itself without your constant supervision. Let me ask you something, quietly. When you stop trying to define what you're feeling, does your body soften, even slightly? That's not coincidence. That's regulation beginning to take root. You see, when we transition identities, the body often leads before the mind can keep up. Energy shifts. Priorities realign. What once felt urgent loses its grip. And the mind scrambles to catch up, interpreting the unfamiliar as uncertainty. But unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. This mixture of emotions is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're no longer forcing yourself into a single narrative. You're expanding. And expansion feels strange when you've spent years staying contained. So if today you feel peaceful and unsettled, hopeful and cautious, present and unsure, let that be okay. You don't need to choose one state and reject the others. This isn't a test, it's a recalibration. And if you stay here long enough without judgment, without labels, without rushing to make sense of it all, something gentler begins to emerge, a quiet trust. Not in outcomes, not in plans, but in yourself. And that trust is what carries you forward into what's waiting next. There's a quiet grief that surfaces here, Aquarius. Not sharp, not dramatic, just a subtle ache you might not have named yet. It comes when you realize there are parts of you that cannot cross with you, not because they were bad, not because they failed, but because they belong to a season that has already done its work. You've carried certain identities for a long time, the one shaped by what hurt you, the one formed around what you had to endure, the one that knew how to survive when softness wasn't an option. And for years, those parts kept you going. They gave you structure. They gave you a story. They gave you a way to understand yourself. So of course letting them go feels complicated. Because when pain has been your companion, it becomes familiar. When resilience has been your identity, it becomes comforting. When survival has defined you, it feels dangerous to imagine life without it. There's a moment here where a question rises, uninvited. If I'm no longer the one who endured, if I'm no longer the one who held it all together, if I'm no longer the one shaped by what happened to me, then who am I? That question isn't weakness. It's honesty. Many people cling to suffering not because they want pain, but because pain once gave them meaning. It explained their strength. It justified their distance. It gave shape to their inner world. And releasing it can feel like erasing proof of everything you've survived. But listen to me, Aquarius. You are not losing your depth by leaving pain behind. You are not betraying your past by choosing ease. You are not becoming empty by shedding what once protected you. You are becoming spacious. There's a difference. The old identity was built to withstand pressure. The one forming now is built to receive. Receive rest. Receive connection. Receive moments that don't require armor. And that shift can feel exposed. You might notice moments where you don't know how to respond anymore. Where your usual defenses don't activate. Where the urge to explain yourself fades. That's not disorientation. That's trust beginning to take shape. Trust that you don't need a story of pain to justify your presence. Trust that you don't need to prove your resilience to earn your place. Let me ask you something, gently. What if the strength you're stepping into now doesn't look impressive from the outside? What if it looks like simplicity, like choosing differently without explanation, like allowing yourself to be defined by what brings you alive rather than what broke you? This isn't about erasing the past. It's about loosening your grip on it. The memories remain. The wisdom remains. But the identity forged in survival no longer has to lead. And as that realization settles, you may feel a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. As if you've taken off a heavy coat and suddenly feel the air on your skin. That sensation is not loss, it's contact. Contact with a version of you that doesn't need to be braced for impact. That doesn't expect struggle as the default. That is learning how to exist without constant tension. And I know this feels unfamiliar. I know it may even feel unsafe at first. But stay with it. Because what emerges when the old identity steps aside is not emptiness, it's presence. And that presence is what begins to shape everything that follows. There's something else you might be noticing now, Aquarius. Something subtle, almost confusing. You know good things are coming. You can sense it in the way your life has softened, in the doors that no longer feel locked, in the quiet certainty that you're not moving backward anymore, and yet the excitement you expected never quite arrives. You don't feel euphoric. You're not buzzing with anticipation. There's no rush of adrenaline, no spark that says, this is it. Instead, there's a calm that feels unfamiliar, a neutrality you don't know how to celebrate, almost like standing on the edge of something beautiful without the urge to jump. And part of you wonders quietly, what's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong. What's happening is much more human than that. When you've spent years navigating unpredictability, your nervous system learns to stay alert. It learns to scan, to brace, to look for what might go wrong next. So when safety finally appears, when life stops demanding constant reaction, your system doesn't immediately relax. It waits. It looks for the fine print, the hidden cost, the part you missed. Because peace can feel unfamiliar to those who survived chaos. And unfamiliar doesn't register as pleasure at first. It registers as uncertainty. This is why joy can arrive quietly instead of loudly. Why contentment might feel flat instead of thrilling. Your body is learning a new language, one that doesn't involve vigilance. One that doesn't require you to earn rest, and that learning curve can feel strange. You may notice yourself thinking, I should be happier than this. I should feel more grateful. I should be excited. But gratitude doesn't always look like enthusiasm. Sometimes it looks like exhale, like steadiness, like not needing to prove anything to yourself anymore. Let me ask you something gently. What if the absence of excitement is not indifference, but integration? What if your system is simply absorbing what it once had to chase? There's a maturity in this phase that doesn't seek fireworks. It seeks alignment. You're no longer measuring life by how intense it feels. You're measuring it by how sustainable it is. And that's a profound shift, especially for someone like you, Aquarius, who has always lived ahead of the curve, who has always felt the future before it arrived. Now, instead of racing toward what's next, you're allowing what's next to meet you where you are. And that changes the emotional tone entirely. So if you're not feeling thrilled, if you're not overflowing with excitement, let yourself off the hook. This is not a failure of appreciation. It's a sign that your nervous system is learning how to exist without urgency. You're not waiting for something to happen. You're letting something settle. And settling doesn't sparkle, it stabilizes. Stay here long enough, and you'll notice something shift beneath the surface. A quiet confidence. A grounded trust. Not in what's coming, but in your ability to meet it. And that kind of assurance doesn't need to announce itself. It simply stays. And what that steadiness opens next may feel less dramatic, but far more real than anything you've known before. There is a deeper reason this phase feels unfamiliar, Aquarius. It is not just personal. It is generational. Somewhere inside you, there is a quiet understanding that you are walking in a direction no one before you was encouraged to take. Not because they lacked courage, not because they did not try, but because the path simply did not exist yet. You are not following footsteps. You are leaving them. And that carries a particular weight. When you step outside inherited patterns, there is no reference point to lean on. No one to say, this is how it goes. No example to reassure you that the ground will hold. So the mind searches for certainty. It looks back. It looks sideways. It wonders if you are being reckless or simply brave in a way your nervous system has never practiced before. But what you are doing is not rebellion. It is integration. You are breaking cycles not through force, but through awareness. By choosing responses that feel calmer. By refusing to pass on fear as tradition. By questioning beliefs that once felt unquestionable. And that kind of change does not come with applause. It often comes with solitude. There may be moments when you feel oddly unaccompanied, even when surrounded by people. Moments when you realize that the life you are building cannot be explained in familiar language. And that is where doubt sometimes creeps in. You may think, should I be more certain by now? Should I have a clearer plan? Should I know exactly where this is leading? But clarity does not always arrive all at once, especially when you are forging something new. Here is the truth most people never hear. You do not need to see the whole road. You never did. You only need to recognize the next step that feels honest in your body. The next conversation that feels true. The next boundary that feels clean. The next choice that does not require you to abandon yourself. That is how new paths are made. not through vision alone, but through presence. Let me ask you something gently. When you stop trying to predict the outcome, do you feel a subtle steadiness return? That steadiness is your compass. It may not point to a destination yet, but it knows when you are aligned. And alignment is enough for now. Because walking a path no one before you walked is not about being fearless. It is about trusting that your internal sense of direction is more reliable than external approval. You are not here to replicate a story, you are here to revise it. And revisions take time. They require patience with uncertainty, kindness toward yourself in moments of doubt, and the humility to move forward without guarantees. If this feels slow, if it feels unremarkable, if it feels like you are simply putting one foot in front of the other, that is not a sign of stagnation. It is a sign of foundation. You are building something that can hold you, not just impress others. So keep walking, even when the horizon feels distant. Even when the path feels quiet. You are not behind. You are early. And what you are creating now will one day feel obvious in hindsight, even if it feels uncertain in the present. Stay with me. Because there is one more shift ahead, one that asks for trust not in where you are going, but in who you are becoming as you go. There is a softness that begins to settle in now, Aquarius. Not relief exactly, more like a quiet permission you did not know you were waiting for. You have spent so many years working on yourself, reflecting, healing, reframing, asking what else needs to change, and somewhere along the way improvement became a habit. Growth became a responsibility. Stillness felt suspicious. But listen to this moment carefully. Nothing here is asking you to transform again. There is no new version to chase, no hidden flaw to correct, no deeper layer you need to excavate to finally earn rest. This season is different. It is not calling for effort. It is calling for allowance. Allowance to wake up and not immediately scan for what needs fixing. Allowance to experience a day without turning it into a lesson. Allowance to exist without an internal narrator grading your progress. You are not broken. And because you are not broken, you do not need another reinvention. What you need now is far quieter than that. You need permission to live without bracing, without proving, without constantly becoming. That may feel uncomfortable at first, because you have been defined by your insight, by your ability to see patterns, by your willingness to confront what others avoid. But awareness does not mean you must stay in repair mode forever. There comes a point where wisdom stops asking questions and starts trusting the answers already integrated. This is that point. You may notice moments where nothing feels urgent, where you are not driven to analyze your emotions, where you are simply present, and that presence feels almost unfamiliar. That is not stagnation. That is arrival. And arrival does not need witnesses. Let me ask you something gently. What if you stopped treating your life as a project and started treating it as a place you are allowed to inhabit? Not perfect. Not optimized. Just lived. You do not need to be more healed to deserve ease. You do not need to be more evolved to choose joy. You do not need to understand everything before allowing yourself to feel okay. This is not a season of striving upward. It is a season of settling inward, of letting your shoulders drop, of trusting that who you are right now is enough to hold what is coming. And there is something profoundly Aquarian about this realization, because you were never meant to become someone else. You were meant to shed what you were never required to carry. So as this chapter closes, let the nervous system rest. Let the mind be quiet. Let the identity soften. Nothing needs to be solved. Nothing needs to be earned. You are allowed to be here, exactly as you are. Freedom is not loud. It is the quiet moment you realize you do not have to become anyone else. And if you've stayed with me until this moment, Aquarius, that tells me something important. It tells me you weren't just listening. You were remembering. Remembering a version of yourself that doesn't rush, doesn't force clarity, doesn't ask permission to exist. As this message settles, notice how your body feels right now, not your thoughts, your breath, your chest, the quiet underneath the noise. That quiet is not emptiness, it's recognition. You are not alone in this space. There are others listening right now who feel the same subtle shift, the same soft resolve, the same knowing that life doesn't need to be loud to be meaningful. This is what Aquarius energy does best. It gathers people not through urgency, but through resonance. So if something in you feels seen, leave a comment, even a single word. It doesn't have to be polished, just real. And if this channel feels like a place where you can breathe a little deeper, stay with us. Subscribe. Not out of obligation, but out of alignment. Most of all, trust yourself. Trust the pace you're moving at. Trust the quiet choices you're making that no one else needs to understand. This journey doesn't end here. It continues in the way you show up tomorrow. In the way you listen inward before reacting outward. In the way you allow life to meet you without armor. Another message is already forming. Another layer is waiting to unfold. And when it arrives, it will meet you exactly where you are. Until then, be gentle with yourself. You're doing better than you think. And you're right on time.